All right, let's get started on this Octopus Webinar Wednesday. I'm Ryan Russo, and today we are going to be talking turbocharging Azure DevOps with Octopus Deploy. And our presenter today is Derek Campbell. Derek, how are you doing?
I'm good, Ryan. It's summer in Scotland, unfortunately. I say unfortunate because it's a bit of an oxymoron. But yeah, no, things are good, thanks. I'm really excited about today's webinar. What about yourself?
Oh man, I'm doing great. Just enjoying summer in Dallas. So probably a little bit warmer than you are. I haven't checked though. Maybe not.
It is, definitely is.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm excited about this topic too, and I think we've got a lot of people who are. So let's go ahead and get started after a little bit of housekeeping. So we are recording this. I'll be doing the editing and getting it uploaded and all that. Cleaning up and a little bit of chores later tonight. So we should have this emailed out in about 48 hours from when the webinar ends. You should receive an email with the link of the recording and any links to any resources, documentation, samples, etc. that Derek uses during the presentation. And we're also on our community Slack for Q&A. So if you go to octopus.com/Slack, you can join there, join our community, and also join the webinar channel. Ask any questions you have there, and I will be on there, and we also have like James and Sean's on, I believe, too. So a few other Octopods are on to help answer questions. And at the end of the presentation, we'll do a Q&A where we'll take some of those questions and ask Derek directly. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Derek.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so let's jump into the agenda. We'll start by discussing what is Azure DevOps. Then we'll move over to discussing what Octopus Deploy is. We're then going to use Azure DevOps and Octopus Deploy in conjunction and do a demo. And then, like Ryan said, there'll be some time at the end of it where we'll address some of your questions as well. So let's jump straight in. What is Azure DevOps? Azure DevOps started out as some time ago as TFS, and then there was some Visual Studio Team Services Online, and then I believe it was last August, it was rebranded as Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps consists of 5 separate products, all under that Azure DevOps brand. It is pretty much an all-in-one DevOps solution where you can build, test, and deploy your applications. There's also a repo and an artifact source as well there. It comes in 2 separate flavors where you've got cloud and on-premise. And one of the really great things about Azure DevOps is that it's really extendable. And what you have is access to over 1,000 extensions in the marketplace. And Octopus is actually one of those. And a fun fact is that roughly half of packages that Octopus receives comes from TFS or Azure DevOps. Which I think is really great. So let's just jump in and have a quick look at what Azure DevOps is. Let's just expand the sidebar. Okay, so as I mentioned, Azure DevOps is made up of 5 separate products. You've got now this is the summary. This isn't this is just the overview. You've got boards, so you can have things like work items, agile, Kanban boards, all that sort of good stuff. So you can, depending on how you approach things, you can use this for that. We're not going to be using boards today. And then next up is we have repos. This is pretty much self-explanatory. This is a repository. In this instance, OctoFX, which I'll discuss in some detail in just a moment. As you can see, you can expand it out. You can see your solution file, all your NuGet, Octopack, smoke test, database, and so forth. The one that we'll be using most heavily today is pipelines. Pipelines specify your build process and your pipeline, your release pipeline. So as you can see here, we've got obviously a release here. Select edit, and you'll be able to see the release information in detail. I'll talk through this in just a moment, which then you push through into a deployment, and it goes through the stages. So it creates a release, deploys all the way through to production. As you can see, I've been testing this today, and we have a fully green release, which is always nice. So hopefully that the demo gods will be with me today. You also have test plans as well. We're not going to be touching this, but what you can do is use test plans to run your testing. So there's things like integration testing, unit testing, all that sort of good stuff. And you can also load test as well, which is great. And lastly, but certainly not least, is artifacts. So you can use Azure DevOps as an artifact repository, or you can, Octopus also does that as well. And I'll break that down in just a moment. So that's Azure DevOps. Okay, next up is Octopus Deploy. What is Octopus Deploy? Well, Octopus started out in 2011, 2012, and it's an automated deployment tool. It does one thing, and it does it exceptionally well. It does deployments. You can use it to promote releases between environments. And one of the things is, one of the key benefits of Octopus is you have a single deployment process. And what that means is you have a single deployment process, meaning whether you're deploying to dev, test, pre-prod, or production, it's the same deployment process. So what that gives is a repeatable, reliable, and consistent deployment. And one of my favorite features about Octopus is it's an API-first platform. So you can do anything you can do within the user interface, you can do over the API. Much like Azure DevOps, it also comes in a cloud and on-premise. So yeah, another fun fact is that almost 1 in 10 deployments in Azure are via Octopus, with about, I think it's about 30% or thereabouts is coming from Azure DevOps. And lastly, the overwhelming majority of deployments happen with right-click publish within Visual Studio, which is a little bit concerning. But ultimately, I'm hopeful that those would be dev and test. And then obviously once you have production, that would be using some form of a deployment process. As an old adage goes, friends don't let other friends right-click publish. But yes, okay, so let's jump in and have a quick look at Octopus. This is what a typical Octopus server looks like. What you've got here on the left-hand side is your projects. And then what that is your projects can be generally items which you ship together at the same time. So this could just be, an application. It can be a really large monolith, or you could, you break it down to your 100 microservices and you have lots of projects down here. But yeah, that's it. That's pretty much what a project is. And then across the top here, you have environments. So as you can see, we've got dev, test, pre-prod, and production. So yeah. Okay, so let's jump into OctoFX. One last thing. This is the dashboard that you log into. And it's actually one of my favorite features about Octopus in that you can see exactly what version of the application is where. And what you also have is once you're into the project, you also have another dashboard that you can see. Again, you can see what channel or what release is where. As you can see, 2019 version 07.17.63 is in dev and test, but hasn't been deployed to pre-production yet. This is the deployment process. This is where you would configure that. We're not going to be configuring a deployment process today. The main reason for that is that we have an Octopus 101 included as part of the email that we'll send over, where we actually take the application that we're going to use today and we configure that during the webinar. So if you want more details about this, then certainly check out that webinar. Okay, and this is where you store your variables. Octopus variables tend to be things like which change between environments. So as you can see here, you've got a database name. That could be database user, for instance, some IIS application pool names, all that sort of good stuff. So these can change. So as you push it through that pipeline, then these things change, and ultimately it changes the connection string of your application as well. Okay, next up is triggers. You can use Octopus to automatically deploy. So say, for instance, quite often what you'll find is you want everything that the developers have done the day before, you want to push that into a shared development environment. That's something that you can schedule. You may also want everything that was developed and approved yesterday to then be automatically deployed to test for your testers to go in and test things. You can also use it for things like auto scaling. So, you may find you bring a VM online and you can then run through the deployment process before bringing it back into your load balancer. Okay, so let's jump into infrastructure. So what you've got here, this is where you configure your environments. Generally try and keep your environments fairly low. But this is where you would add your deployment targets. As you can see, we've got 16 deployment targets. We support a range of deployment targets. In this instance, you can do listening tentacles or polling tentacles on Windows servers. We do actually have a Linux tentacle in development at the moment. It's also in public beta. So if that's something you're interested in, certainly check it out. You can deploy. You can also deploy to Linux using SSH connections, and also you can deploy to Mac. And today, we're actually one of the applications that we'll be deploying, or one of the parts is it's going to be getting deployed to an Azure web app. So yeah, or you can do service fabric clusters as well, Kubernetes, offline package drops. Yeah, and under accounts, this is where you configure things like Azure service principals. You can base that on things like per resource group. You can base it on per region, per environment. So you may have like a resource group for dev, a separate one for test. This gets really granular, and you can also use it for AWS accounts as well, and just some usernames and passwords like Linux keys and so forth. Okay, let's jump into library. Much like I've seen earlier on with Azure DevOps, it has the Artifactory product. You can actually register these as an external feed. So you could come in, it's like add feed, and then set this up here. Additionally, you can also just post your packages directly to Octopus as well. So as you can see, we've got some AutoFX database, rate service and trading website. And then lastly, in configuration, you have some of your basic administrations like users, usernames, passwords, groups, diagnostics, your auditing log as well, and some maintenance bits as well. So yeah, that is, let's into here. And okay, so let's jump back to what a CI/CD pipeline generally looks like. I generally find that most pipelines look similar to this. You'll normally have a developer and he's doing developer-y things on his laptop or his desktop. At the end of the day, or generally, he should always commit more frequently than that. But yeah, if he checks in his code, it then goes to source control. This could, in this instance, it's going to be using Azure DevOps repositories. And then the pipeline, this is this little rocket ship, monitors the source control. It then builds a code, runs the tests, creates the artifacts, and then pushes those packages to Octopus, or creates a release which can then pull the package from Azure DevOps Artifactory. Most often than not, the development will be an automated deployment. This will generally be triggered by a build, and it'll go through to development. Once that's tested, once that's approved by the developers, QA or a tester comes in and they'll manually promote that within Octopus, or you can also promote it within Azure DevOps, push it to QA or test, and then lastly, once the testing has passed, you can then hand it over to a web admin or a DBA, and often they promote that to production, and generally check in things before it's all good to go. Okay, so let's jump into today's demo. Okay, so just want to talk about OctoFX very briefly. OctoFX is a sample application. We do this. It won't be the Azure DevOps link. It will be a GitHub link. These are fully open. We'll include this as the sample to get you, if you want to jump in and get your hands dirty there. But just some background. OctoFX Limited is a fictitious London-based online foreign exchange company. Retail customers and businesses can register an account with OctoFX and use the platform to trade currencies. Okay. And OctoFX consists of three separate parts of the service. It has a .NET front-end customer-facing website which lists the exchange rates. It has a Windows service which is the website is hosted on an Azure web app. We then have a Windows service which is running on a virtual machine, which is used to update the exchange rate, and that is also going to be running on a virtual machine in Azure. And then lastly, it's all underpinned by a SQL database, and that is hosted in Azure on a shared SQL server. That's just to keep things tight for today's demo. Okay, so let's jump in and have a look. As I showed you here, you've got your source. This concludes your solution file. What we then have, you also have things like commits, pushes, you can do your pull requests and so forth. Then we have pipelines, and this is where we'll spend most of today in Azure DevOps doing our deployments. So what we've got here is we've got a build, as I showed you earlier on. I've run it a few times today. So what we're going to do though is we're just going to jump in and select edit. And I'll talk you through today's build. So as you can see, we've got the pipeline, it's the name, and then this is getting the Azure repo Git, and this is using OctoFX and the OctoFX repository. And then you'll see here there's a job which runs on an agent. It says use Octo Tools version 6.82. This is only available if you install it from the marketplace. So we also have it available on our website. So if you go to octopus.com/downloads, you'll find, if you come down, that there's an Azure DevOps and TFS extension. If you select download, it will take you through to the Visual Studio Marketplace, where if you select get it free, you can then install it directly into your organization. This extension is already installed in this organization, so we don't have to do this. But yeah, if you do find you log on to Azure DevOps and you can't find this, you can just install it from the marketplace. Okay, so the first step is using Octo Tools version 6.82. This, for the most part, is something that you probably leave alone. But what this is doing is specifying to use version 6.82 of octo.exe. The reason we're specifying the exact version is that we're using spaces here. So there's a few things just to factor in, but if you do see some issues here, certainly check out octo.exe, the current version, and install the latest and greatest tools. But we're just specifying Octo Tools version 6.82. If you go to the same downloads, that's the current version. Then, as you can see here, we've got NuGet 4.41. It's then going to restore NuGet packages, much like you do with most builds. And then we then build the solution. We've then got, as you can see, we've got some MS build arguments here, which is specifying the staging directory. It's running Octopack, which is what runs when, and it creates the NuGet packages. It's then obviously publishing the packages to file share as well at the end. Lastly, again, this is one of the steps that will only come when you install the extension. You're pushing the packages to Octopus, and this is something I just want to take just a moment. You'll see here that it's turbocharging Azure DevOps. What you've got here is if you select Manage, you can come in and see your service connections. So we've got a demo, we've got Octopus Bob, and then turbocharging Azure DevOps. You can, as you can see here, I can flick between a couple, so demo and turbocharging Azure DevOps. You can add a new connection. So you may find that you have different logons or different users for different projects. So you can actually have it so that you have an API key in Octopus that only has certain access to certain projects. And you may find that certain projects have you may find that there'll be a dedicated user for that. So you just specify the connection name, the server URL, and the API key that you would create within the Octopus user. In this instance, we're just going to use the existing service connection, which is attached to this version of Octopus, this installation of Octopus. So as you can see, I mentioned spaces. This is being posted to the Azure DevOps space. It's then grabbing this package here using the build number as well. There's 3 separate packages. You could, if you wish, you could also have it so that you kick off a deployment as well from here, but we're not going to do that. So yeah, okay. So let's jump into release. This is where you specify your release. So as I was showing you earlier on, everything is all green. Let's jump in and have a quick look at this. Okay, let's minimize this a little bit. So we've got our artifacts here. Everything within this is pretty much clickable. So just be careful. What you've got here is you've got your artifact being posted here. And then you've got your continuous deployment trigger. This is something you will want to enable. Without this button, it's not going to create a release every time a new build is available and then run through your deployment process. So certainly this is one of the ones that's pretty much the first thing that I do once I've created something in Azure DevOps is enable the. Okay. You can also schedule things here, but we're doing this manually for today's webinar. Next up is stages. We have 4 separate stages. We're going to create the release, we're going to deploy to development, deploy to test, and then deploy to production. Each stage has a pre-deployment condition. So you select here, after release, so you create the release. At this point, it then automatically then creates the release within Octopus. You do have a whole range of options here, things like pre-deployment approvals, gates as well. We're not using that within Azure DevOps today, but it's certainly something I would recommend checking out. And you can also define the trigger. So for instance, if you wanted to have an after stage or after release, in this instance, it makes sense to do after release. And then you also have a post-deployment condition. Again, you can also have post-deployment approvals and some gates as well there, but we don't have those just now. Okay, so let's jump in and see what we're doing with create release. Again, these are one of the steps that we use as part of today's extension. And then as you can see, we're creating the release for OctoFX. This is using the Turbocharging Azure DevOps extension, API key or service connection. We're posting again to Azure DevOps, project name OctoFX, using the release number. I meant that here, what you could do is you could automatically, at this point, then just automatically deploy it to dev in a single environment. Again, I don't tend to recommend that. I tend to separate it out into separate stages, meaning if one of them kicks off, you can always redeploy. But yeah, as you can see, and then there's also some advanced options around tenanted deployments. But again, that's out of scope for today's webinar. Okay, we'll go back to the pipeline. Let's jump into the pre-deployment conditions. This step, the deployment to development, is very much identical to deploy to test and to production. So let's spend a bit of time in development. So the trigger of this is once it creates the release, it then deploys to development. You can have it manual or just straight after release as well. Again, you can use things like pre-deployment approvals and gates as well. In this instance, we are going to use a single step. We're going to use this to deploy Octopus release, which we've just built and created the release, to the Turbocharging Azure DevOps service connection. Same space, which is Azure DevOps. Project is OctoFX, again using the release number, and then deploy to environments development. Much like we did earlier on, all very, very similar. Okay, and then the next one, as you can see, this is the trigger, which is deploy to development. And then if you jump in and have a look, it's identical. We're just deploying what we've just deployed to dev up to test. As you can see, you specify the environment here. And lastly, let's jump in after stage deploy to test. So as you can see, this is going to take us all the way through from build to production with a single build. Okay, let's just jump in and just make sure that that is the exact same. Here we go, OctoFX to production, same service connection, same space, OctoFX project using the release number. Okay, so let's jump in and we will start a build. So log in. You can have this run automatically if you wish as well. We're just for today's demo. What we're going to do is we're going to use the agent pool hosted Visual VS 2017. This is coming in from the master branch, build configuration of release, and then any CPU and no system debugging. Okay, so let's select run. Okay, this is great. So an agent, this has been passed over to the agent to run the task. You can look at, as you see, you can see it within here. So you've got the full logs. Additionally, there is a button in the one second, actually, I'll show you. One thing to be aware of is, let's just have a look. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's have a look. So jumping back into the pipeline, let's have a quick look. The show deployment progress, I should have spoken of this. I always tick this box. The main reason is it will grab all the logs from Octopus as it's happening. There tends to be a delay sometimes, but just something that you're something to be aware of. If you don't show deployment progress, then it will pass the items to Octopus and then just move on. So just something to be aware of. So let's jump in and see how that build is happening. As you can see, it's underway. Okay, so it's initialized the job. It's checked out the source code. It's specified to use version 6.82. It's using NuGet 4.41. It's restored the NuGet packages, as you can see within the logs. As you've got things like Knockout, JS, AutoFac, etc. So yes, let's close that out. It's then built the solution. This is, if you're familiar with what you do locally when you press build. So it's going through this. It's then created the NuGet packages, posted them into the directory. The next stage then has pushed these packages. As you can see, it's going to demo.octopus.app with the required API key. And then as you can see, it's pushing 3 separate. So we've got octofx.database, octofx.rateservice, and octofx.trading website. Okay, so as you can see, this is all completed successfully. What we should see is, we should now see if you come into releases. There we go. As you can see here, this was created less than 30 seconds ago. If you select on the release, you can then jump in and see it deploying to development and live. Let's just have a look at the logs. If you select here, you can see it pulls in the full logs from Octopus, which is great. Okay, let's go back to the pipeline. We should see deploy to development in progress. Let's jump over to Octopus. There we go. So as you can see, we have Azure DevOps, we have demo.octopus.app. You can come into the project, which has its own dashboard here. You can see that version 2019-07-17.7 is currently in deployment. Let's click in. Just give it a moment. Okay, so this is it. We can go through the deployment process. Whilst this is deploying, one thing I just want to point out is jump into the deployment process. Like I said earlier on, I'm not going to spend much time here. We do have an Octopus 101 where we configure OctoFX in detail, and I would definitely recommend checking that out. Without that, it generally just goes in and it covers it really well. So the one thing I wanted to point out here is the manual intervention step. Manual intervention step, again, this is one of my favorite steps. It's something you generally still want to have someone in control of your deployments or to production. In this instance, what we've got here is it's a manual intervention step. You can specify responsible teams. So for instance, you have a DBA team. You may find that you build in a manual intervention step for any database deployments, but certainly something to be aware of. Today, I won't be doing it best practice, as I'll be creating it and then approving it. And one of the things I actually use this fairly regularly, and we only have this run for production. So whilst I'm talking just now, it's deploying everything to dev and test. Much like I showed you earlier on, you probably want some form of automation for this so that it goes automatically to dev and test, or you can have some manual approval. And again, you can do that within Octopus or Azure DevOps. There's quite a few things which do overlap between the two, so you can use Azure DevOps or Octopus Deploy to do certain things. And like I've shown you with the gates, you may find that this isn't required for your application because you're doing it in Azure DevOps, or vice versa, you do it in Octopus. So that's entirely your decision. So in today's webinar, this step is only going to run for production. The rest should be deploying as I speak. Okay, let's go back to the overview. Right, so we have a successful deployment to development. We should come back to Azure DevOps. It's in progress. I expect it's just at the end. And there we go. So test is kicked off, meaning if we go back, we should, one moment. Let's refresh the page. So deploy to development has succeeded. If you come in here, you should see the full logs. So this pulls everything from Octopus, and one moment I'll just show you what's happening here. Okay, let's close this out. Okay, so as you can see, development has been deployed. Let's jump in. You can come in, and when everything's good, you can use the task summary. And then whenever, if you do see any issues, jump into the task log. You can play about with some of the level. In this instance, more often than not, interesting and info. If there's an issue, you can use verbose. So as you can see, it's went through the release to development. It's created the SQL user if it doesn't exist. It's created a database if it doesn't exist. It creates a database user if it doesn't exist. And then it's added a database user to the role. Next up, it's acquired the packages. So as you can see, you've got it's grabbing each of the packages, which is in this instance, OctoFX trading website, OctoFX.database. This is being run from our Bastion box, as we generally don't recommend doing deployments directly, installing a tentacle directly on a SQL server. We normally have some form of management or jump box there. Okay, so it's deployed the database, which is great. And one thing I really like about this step, particularly with Azure Web Apps, is you can actually see the resource directly in Azure. In this instance, I'm just going to, let's launch this site. That's great. As you can see, everything is looking good. It's deployed the Windows service and the database. Let's jump back to the overview. Okay, so this has went really quickly. So if you jump back, you should see test. And then as you can see, we've got a little orange eye. So green is task completed without any problems. We also have a big red cross for when there's an issue. And the orange eye is meaning the task is waiting for manual intervention. So let's go into test just before we approve that. Let's jump in. go to the task log. As you can see, this is the same release going to test. It's acquired the package, it's went through the exact same deployment process. Much like I was saying earlier on, it's a single deployment process that can be reused over and over and giving you that more repeatable and reliable deployment process. And then, yeah, it's deployed the trading website. Let's jump in here and have a look at, there we go, OctoFX test.azurewebsites.net. That's all deployed, which is fantastic. Okay, so now, the next step now is production is now, it's now in a manual approval. So as you can see, we log in, approve deployment. I'm going to take ownership here. Generally, again, this is what I was saying earlier on. Generally, you don't. If you've carried out the deployment, then you probably should approve. You know, it's much like you do with your source control from like a pull request perspective. What I would definitely recommend here is just getting someone else to approve it. But in this instance, as I'm the person doing the webinar, I am going to deploy. So like proceed, and now that's the approval. It's now going to run through the exact same deployment process which you used in development, then in test, and then this is now happening in production. So here we should, same idea. If you jump in, let's close out. Jump into the task log. It's going through. This is all happening on. It's grabbing this. Whilst this is happening, I'll just show you. As you can see, jump into library, octofx.database, and this is the same version number that we're using just now. As you can see, today is the 17th, and everything is good. This is, again, I've seen earlier on, this is where you would add the feed if you do want to use this as Octopus as, Azure DevOps as your package repository. Okay, so let's go back. We should see that deployment to production is almost completed. Okay, we jump into the task log. It's going through the same deployment process. It's deployed the database. We should see, as you can see, we're now deploying the Windows service, and that is it. It's now then, and then at the end, apply retention policy on tentacles. This is something that runs with every deployment and just cleans up anything there, but it's just something to be aware of. So as you can see, we've got the URL here, https octofx-prod.azurewebsites.net. Let's bring this up. Okay, so now the application pool is spinning up on the Azure web app. It's then used the connection string to SQL or SQL or the database. It's then grabbing this information, and it's also connected to the Windows service. Okay, we should see this almost completed. Excellent, so that's us. We now have a production website. Okay, so if we pop back to Octopus, back to the overview, you can see it's version 2019-07-17.7 has been successfully deployed to development, test, and production. If you come back to here, let's go back to the pipeline. We have an all-green deployment pipeline. So we've created the release, deployed to development, deployed to test, and then deployed to production. Like I was saying earlier on, within Octopus, if you did want to, say for instance, if you did want to come in, you can manually promote this. So if this wasn't, so if you did want to, you could deploy to and then select your environment. So yeah, if you wanted at this point, you could then deploy to a production, but that's not required at this stage. But yes, that's us. We have a fully green, which is great. But just to summarize what we've done here today, we've checked in this, the source code is there. We've then built that. We've specified octo.exe 6.82. We've restored the NuGet packages. We've then built the Visual Studio solution. From there, we've then posted the packages which we've created from within Azure DevOps, and then posted those into Octopus. We've then we've created a release within Azure DevOps. We've then push that to automatically create a release within Octopus, which is then taking the 3 packages which are already hosted within Octopus, deployed it to development automatically deployed it to test, and then lastly, we've deployed it to production with the use of a manual intervention step. And we now have a fully working website, 3 Windows services which are updating, and 3 separate databases. And that's us for today's demo. Okay, over to Ryan. Ryan, is there any questions?
No, we've actually, that was a pretty straightforward demo. I haven't seen, oh, I have seen I missed the demo, this question come up in the Zoom chat. So let me read it real quick. Is there any functionality to automate and work with Azure SQL?
Yes. To be honest, if you can do Azure SQL, so that's no problem at all. You can definitely do that.
Yeah, I think what I've done, and I'm assuming this is like the Azure SQL Server and databases in SQL. Yeah, you can deploy to those similar to how you would deploy other database changes.
Yeah, that's it. It's very, very similar. You know, at the end of the day, it's just a script. It's deploying a database. But yeah, that's no problem at all. I also see the Azure Web Apps as well, different deployment slots. James, yes. In short, the answer to that is yes. You can use. Actually, let me I'll show you. In this instance, I haven't specified a slot, but if you come into deployment targets, you should see it. There we go. We've got this OctoFX Dev Web. You can come in and then you can just basically, you can either use a variable or you can create your stage, like you generally have your staging and then your production, and then you could actually have it so that you switch that round, much like you do with, say, blue-green deployments.
Awesome, great answer and great question, James. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any other questions, so I think we are good on the question segment. So I will outro us now. So as we mentioned at the top, we are recording this this webinar. We will send that recording out in about 48 hours, along with links to some samples and other information on integrating Octopus with Azure DevOps. Derek, thank you so much for that presentation. That was great. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Ryan. That was really enjoyable. And as well, I just want to say thanks for everybody for attending. But yeah, we'll send everything out. Any questions, just get in touch.